How's everybody doing? It is Friday once again. They let us make it this far. And this is another episode of the new Friday type laid back podcast that I do, where we just talk about some weird stuff. There's not really much of a structure, it's kind of less formal, but we have a little bit of fun here. So far, I think in the first episode, I talked about aliens in Italy, talking with a Bigfoot. Then after that, the week after, I talked about how a ghost got a guy fired at the Conjuring House, possible dinosaurs in Colorado, and ghost footprints in Thailand. And then last week, I talked about reality glitches, which people seem to like that one, and I thought it was pretty interesting too. And for this one, I thought that I would go with one that I have a little bit of experience in, and that's haunted hospitals. Now, there is a show on TV called Haunted Hospitals, but we don't have the budget to exactly reenact all these, you know what I mean? But yeah, we've all been to a hospital at least once in our lives. A lot of people have had experiences in one, a lot of people haven't. But I've always found hospitals to have a bit of a liminal space vibe to them, and I know that's because they're very similar looking on the inside, and, just endless hallways of rooms, and it can get kind of creepy when you're all alone in them. But there's also a feeling of foreboding or distress, I guess, that I always get from a hospital. And I figure that's because, there's been hundreds of thousands, and in some hospitals, millions of people have gone through those doors and either had someone die, had someone be born, had an operation. So there's a whole bunch of complex emotions that probably get left behind as like an imprint. And of course, there's the aspect that if someone dies at the hospital, it may have been so quick that they may be sticking around, not really sure that they're dead. I have a couple of my own stories about hospitals, and I'll get to those in a second. And I'll link to this thing that I found here. It's a forum post from allnurses.com. I'll link to that in the description, and we can start going over some of these here. So the very first one here is very interesting. The best I've heard from a nurse who said that one night she was floated to oncology at the hospital that she used to work at. She was given a patient who was passing away. They had been unconscious for several days. At one point during the night, the nurse went into the room, and the patient was at the top of the bed and looked at her and said, "Don't let them take me." The nurse was freaked out, of course, and asked her who was going to take her, and she said that the black thing up there, and pointed up in the air. The patient died within minutes. So we probably all have a pretty good guess as to what she was seeing or he was seeing, but what do you think it was? Do you think that it was the Grim Reaper? Do you think that it was something else? I've heard other stories that I don't have in front of me right now about weird black figures that can be seen in the corners or in empty rooms. There's plenty of videos on the internet where people who work in hospitals will find somebody that seems to be just made of shadows, and they always stick around in a room where someone has just died or is about to die. What do you think they're there for? And here's another one. I heard a story about a fifth-floor neuro unit. This was told to me, first person. The nurse was at the desk, and a guy in a white nursing garb came through the double doors. He walked into an empty room and never came back out. The nurse thought that it was weird, so he went into the room, and it was empty. He went to the double doors and opened them, and there were two respiratory techs talking at the entrance, who swore they had been talking there the whole time, and that nobody had come through the doors. When one of his co-workers returned from lunch, and he explained what happened, she was like, "Oh, that's just Bob. I don't actually remember the name that was used, so I just picked Bob. He worked there years ago and was accused of doing some seriously bad stuff, and he was sure that he was about to be arrested, so he went down the hall into that room and jumped out the window, and that was in the room that we saw him go into. Apparently, he's seen quite frequently there." So what's the reason why you think that this Bob may be caught in some kind of loop or like a death echo? Another one, the story of Rocking Mary. We closed room 12 in our MICU because just about every patient there that has been there since Mary died complains of seeing a woman wearing a white habit rocking back and forth by their bedside. Apparently, this nun never makes eye contact, just stares outside the window, which happens to be on the patient left side over their head. The window overlooks the hospital cemetery where nuns that have died were buried. Mary was a nun that died of a car accident outside the hospital back in the 1950s. She was only about 30 years old, and all of the patients describe her as a young woman. We all thought it was like the sundown syndrome. Anyways, since then, room 12 became our storage room where no one goes in by themselves unless it's absolutely critical. I've heard of other stories like this where somebody sticks around after they've passed away because they feel like that they haven't done enough yet. So maybe she sits with the patients and maybe doesn't really know that she's scaring the hell out of them. But maybe she's there to help. It's hard to say. It's also pretty wild to me to hear that hospitals have cemeteries, and I figure it's because back in the day a lot of the hospitals were run by the churches or were closely tied to the churches. But yeah, I think every hospital probably has a story about like a nun or a nurse or a doctor from way back in the day, sometimes even from just 10-15 years ago, that still kind of wander the halls and still seem to be checking in on the patients. And here's another one. I got called to a code in the hallway. A patient was being transferred from the ER to the floor. She passed away in the hall. According to the tech, they were carrying on a conversation. The lady looked up and said, "Oh, here comes God. I think I'll go with him." And then she passed away right then and there. Now for me, something like that would be crazy to hear. Because like we all have like personal beliefs and stuff. But to actually hear somebody else say that unprompted and then die right there, that would be extremely jarring. But in my opinion, it would also kind of give you like that hope. Like, yeah, there really is something after all this. And whatever it is, I hope it's like peaceful at least, because if I have to like pay bills and do the dishes and all that after I'm dead, I'm gonna be real pissed. I'm just gonna tell you that right now. I do not want to do any of that stuff after I die. And here's another one. Every hospital that I've ever worked at has had at least one ghost. I've never worked in a nursing home, but I hear from a friend who has that they have their ghosts as well. Years ago, and this will age me, I worked at the old Peter Bent Brigham Hospital. We just moved into our brand new tower, and the old hospital was scheduled for demolition. Several co-workers wanted to walk through the old unit one last time. As we walked past what had once been the large men's ward, we saw a couple of figures in what should have been a completely empty ward. One of my co-workers peeked in to investigate and immediately backed out. Their face was as white as a blank order sheet. Of course, I was curious then, so I looked in myself. All I saw was two older men sitting on an old bed, chatting. My co-worker explained that was Billy and Larry. They were frequent flyers in the ward. Both of them were royal pains in the patoot when they were alive, which they weren't anymore. She said they'd been rumored to still be hanging around, but no one had actually seen them before. Now, stories like this make me think that out of all the times I've been at a hospital, either taking someone there, been there myself, or whatever, I often wonder if like the people I'm seeing are real. I know that sounds crazy and schizo as hell, but I'm like waiting to walk by a room and see somebody in a bed, and then walk by again, and just no one's in there. Which, luckily, that hasn't happened, but I've had stuff happen in hospitals. The first one that I'd like to mention is from a few years ago, from 2020, I think, maybe 2019, I don't remember. My mom was getting an operation done. I don't remember exactly what the operation was, but I was having trouble for some reason finding her wing and finding her room. Usually I just don't have that issue. Everything looked weird and different up in that area of the hospital. So I get turned around and I'm walking down this hallway and I come across a desk. And my first thought when looking at the desk was, damn, that computer monitor looks like it's from the 1998 or something like that. And then the phone was really old looking too. And the woman there, I don't remember what she was dressed like or anything. I don't think I paid much of attention because I was just worried about my mom. And she asked me if I needed help. And I said who I was looking for. And she looked on her list and she said, well, I can't find them on this list, but maybe if you go down there, they'll help you. And she pointed down this other hallway. And I went down the other hallway, and it was like I went through these doors, and everything was normal again. I knew exactly where I was. I was able to find her room and everything. But now after the visit, I wanted to go back and thank this person and tell them that I found Mom and I was talking to her and stuff. And when I went back, it wasn't there. The whole hallway just wasn't there. It was just like the hallway that I had recognized and thought it should look like. Like that area was something completely different and wasn't even like a help desk or anything. I think it ended up being like a corner with chairs in it or something. So I wonder what happened there. Did I have an encounter with like someone who's sticking around like I mentioned earlier? Or was it like a crossover or like a parallel thing? I don't know. It weirds me out whenever I think about it, because I'm like, there's not that many hallways in this hospital, especially on that floor. So I really have to wonder what happened and how I got so turned around and stuff and just where I ended up. And this other one is a little different than the other ones, I guess. So when I was a kid, it was around Easter. I don't remember how old I was, but I was quite young. I want to say less than 10, but I don't remember the exact age. I just remember it was around Easter. And I got very, very sick. Like I had a fever. I couldn't talk. You get the picture. I was very sick. And this one day in particular, I just felt like absolute trash, more so than the other times. So I laid down on the couch, and I was looking at these toy cars that I had got for Easter, and I looked up at the TV, and I still remember that we were watching WWF Backlash. And then I get this, like, awful feeling that comes over me. And there's like an audible pop sound, or at least to me it was audible. And then my nose just started gushing blood. It turns out that I had popped several blood vessels in my nose because there was so much pressure on my sinuses, and I also had a severe sinus infection that I didn't really know about because I was a kid, and as a kid it can be hard to explain how you're feeling. So everybody flips out and stuff. I was home with my mom and my brother. My mom calls 911, and I try to get up to go to the bathroom. And first of all, I try to get up and I just fall to my knees. It's like my legs wouldn't work. But I forced myself up. I staggered to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. And as soon as I did this, I looked at myself and the blood started coming out of my mouth too. So that was pretty scary for someone of my age, and I just started crying. And at the time too, Mom was a volunteer with the ambulance, and so was my dad. But my dad was at work on a night shift or something, I believe. And the ambulance took what felt like forever to get there, and I just kept feeling worse and worse as more and more blood came from my nose. And then at one point, when the paramedics got there, they stopped it, and then as soon as I put my head down to nod, it all just started again. So they took me on the stretcher and they took me in the ambulance and stuff. And then this is when I started to get a little delirious. When I was laying there on the stretcher in the ambulance, I remember hearing people talking that weren't there. Like, a lot of other people that, like, in an ambulance, there's like 2 or 3 people. There's the driver, the passenger, my mom, and another EMT maybe. But in this case, I felt like that there were like 100 people talking. We get to the hospital. By this point, my nose has stopped bleeding finally. I've lost a lot of blood. So I'm in this room and a doctor comes in and he's checking me over, saying that I have a extreme fever and I have something else with my sinuses and they may have to do an operation of some sort. I don't remember a whole lot, but this is where it gets weird, and I know I'm just kind of trying to get you through all the details here. And I've talked about this before on the channel. But at some point, I was left alone in this room, and again, just feeling awful. And then this older man comes in, and he's super nice, he's very kind, he's a doctor, and just his very presence makes me not scared anymore. So he comes over and asks what's wrong. So I tell him, and then he takes his hand and his thumb and forefinger, I think, and he presses on the sides of my sinuses. And then he takes his thumb or his forefinger, I don't remember, and moves it in a circular formation on each side of my sinuses. And I felt the weirdest thing. It felt cold and hot at the same time. And then it's like everything just went away. It didn't feel like I was stuffed up anymore. I didn't feel the pain in my sinuses anymore. My fever broke, everything. And then the guy ruffled my hair and said, essentially, you take care of yourself now, and then patted me on the back and left. Now, a few minutes later, my parents come back with the doctor, and I'm now sitting up in bed, whereas before I couldn't even move. And they're surprised. They ask me, like, what's going on, and I said that this other doctor came in, and the other guy was like, I'm the only doctor on shift right now for this. Well, what are you talking about? So I described the guy, and they had no idea who he was. He didn't match the description of anybody. And yeah, my nose had like a small bleed later that night at like 3 o'clock in the morning, but it only lasted like 2 minutes and it was done. But yeah, it was the weirdest thing. This guy came in and did that. My fever broke, my sinuses healed. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I like to believe that it was maybe like a guardian angel of some sort, but I don't know. It could have been one of these spirits that I mentioned in the hospital that checks up on the patients every now and then. You never know. But, yeah, I'm just kind of thinking back on that now and how crazy it was. I think that might have been one of my first ever experiences with something odd or weird or supernatural, I guess. And with that, I think I will leave it off here. I've been rambling for 18 and a half minutes, so I will cut it off there. I'll see you on Sunday. I hope you enjoyed this little podcast type thing, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. I have a PayPal and a Patreon in the description below if you would like to donate to the channel, and the notification bell's there. You can like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you Sunday. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.